Hello, welcome back. I'm Wendy and today we're going to be looking at painting lichens. We're going to be using some loose textural effects. If you like what you see and you enjoy the videos, you can give me a thumbs up. You can also hit the subscribe button if you want to see some more in the future.
It's not the best time of year to find inspiration, I must say, but I know what we're going to do today is we're going to be on the lookout for some lichen. There's been quite a lot of wind damage around the woods here. I think there's also been some tree felling because of ash dieback, and what you're finding along the footpaths is quite a lot of twigs and branches that have fallen down, and what I'm looking for are some nice specimens. There's quite a nice little bit here, and as you can see the different sorts of lichens growing on there and some moss. Lichen is a good subject to paint and to draw because it really does your observational skills a lot of good, and also there's quite often a lot of colour, and so you can practice your colour mixing as well. When I get back to the studio, what I'm going to do is a very simple painting. It's not going to be a botanical painting in any sense at all, and I think you'll enjoy using some salt to achieve some of the texture and the crustiness that you see on the lichens.
Now here are some stills that I took of some of the twigs that I brought back from the woods. I think it's a good idea to take some photographs of these. If it does take you quite a while to finish some of these paintings, you'll find the lichen will change colour as it dries out. Another idea would be to keep them sprayed, with a mister spray as well. So I'll just run through the materials that I use for this video. It's Saunders Waterford high white watercolour paper, £140 knot. I'm using Winsor and Newton Cotman tube watercolours, Winsor and Newton brushes, a nice soft 2B pencil, and you'll need plenty of kitchen roll and some ordinary table salt. I think that's got everything covered. I probably used a mister spray just to keep the paints damp as I was working as well. I have made a full video dealing with watercolour materials for beginners, which you might find useful if you've not already seen it, and I'll put the link in the description below. And let's start off by mixing some greens. I don't like using tube greens as a rule, but I do sometimes, but in this case I think it would be quite nice to mix up your greens with ultramarine as the blue, and with what I'm mixing in now is some raw sienna to give you a nice subdued, laid back sort of green. To get the green a bit brighter, what I'll be doing is putting in some yellow. It's something like cadmium yellow, lemon yellow will do the job. Remember when you're painting to use, I know it seems obvious, but use plenty of water when you're using watercolour, and also go back to your pool all the time to pick up more pigment. I think particularly beginners make the mistake of not using enough paint on the watercolour paper, and then it's got a very dried out sort of look to it when you're finished. So here I'm mixing up some of the colours for the bark on the twigs. I'm starting off with some burnt sienna. Burnt sienna is really a red, and it looks quite orangey in the light where I'm painting now, with a little bit of sparkle on it which will dry out. To make more of a brown, what I'm going to do with the burnt sienna is to add some ultramarine. They're a good pair of colours to mix together to get you brown, as you can see here. The more burnt sienna in the mix, the warmer your brown will be, and conversely, the more ultramarine, and then your browns are going to look quite cold. Now what I'm doing here is mixing up a very dark brown. Many people have problems in mixing up a real dark in watercolour. You need plenty of pigment, but you also need to have the right amount of water there. Otherwise the dark that you end up with is going to look very dry and very opaque. It's just really down to practicing. But a real good tip that I can give you is not to spread the paint around too much. And as I was saying before, when you're painting, keep going back to your pool. Don't spread the paint around or it will only get more dilute and you won't get the nice darks that you're looking for. This is going to be a very simple little picture. You can see I've done a little sketch here. We're going to use the browns for the bark, and then the areas that I've outlined, sort of the little cloud shapes, we're going to paint some green in there that's going to stand for the leafy lichen that's on the twig. I'm not going to make any other complications or do any other additions to this particular picture. We're just going to keep it nice and simple. We're going to start out and produce something similar to the diagram below. We're going to paint the lichens on first, and then we're going to paint some of the bark around the little lichen masses. Just a little bit more detail and a few more darks have been added on the painting above here. Paint on the greens, use plenty of water. Don't make them too pale because remember watercolour dries back about 40%. And vary the colours. Have some of the lichens more of a yellowy colour and some a bit more of a bluey colour. And let your brush sort of dance around on the paper a little bit, just so you get a nice loose effect. You're not doing a botanical painting. You want to be more interested really in the colours and the marks that you're making. And while the paint is still wet, sprinkle in a little bit of table salt. It will give you some nice textural effects when it dries. You have to leave the salt to dry. You can't hurry the process up at all by using a hairdryer. So while those greens are drying and the salt is taking its effect, I've got a little rigger brush here, and with a little bit of darker green I'm making some marks to stand for those little bits of bushy lichen that you can see on the sample that I've got there. Now I'm starting on the bark, and I'm using some of those mixers that I showed you before. We've got burnt sienna here with just a touch of the ultramarine, so you've got a nice light warm brown underneath. And then as the painting progresses, I'll add some dark browns into it in a wet into wet fashion. Now I'm using a smaller brush, and I'm using a very dark brown, and what I am doing now is sort of a little bit of negative painting to sort of show the curvy edges on the side of the lichens. You don't have to do too many. If you paint a few of them, then the viewer's eye will read them as being in the rest of the painting. As you can see, I'm still working wet into wet at this stage. You can do the same thing when the first coat is dry. As you can see, I'm doing that here. But do be careful not to end up doing an outline around every little bunch of lichens on there, because it won't look very realistic. In some of the places, when you've put the darks on to show the curved edges, then wash off your brush, take off some of the water with a tissue and just spread out that paint, that thick paint that you've put on, so that it sort of blends in with the rest of the paint on the twig. just a little bit of fine-tuning at the end. But keep this little painting very simple. I think you'll find it very effective.